right, welcome to another episode of the LogiCast. My name is BlankaKong. I'm joined by Gunnar Eos and Huddle Wolf.
Hello.
Today's topic is going to be about early access. In general, we're going to discuss an article, and we're also going to link it in the description down below. It's by GamerRant. It's an article about the No Rest for the Wicked developers, suggesting that Dark Souls would have benefited from early access. As you all probably know, Dark Souls came out quite a while ago. I believe it came out in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. So a little over 10 years ago, believe it or not. I know, I feel old too. As soon as I said it, I felt my knees kind of buckle. So, what is early access? Well, according to Google, early access is a funding model in the video game industry that allows consumers to play and purchase games in their pre-release development cycles. Early access games are unfinished, unpolished, and sometimes buggy all the time. But developers can use the funds raised to continue development on the game. Early access games are also known as alpha access, alpha funding or founding, paid alpha, or game preview. So this isn't a common practice among console video games. This is more of a PC thing. Every game that I have thought of that I have played that is or was in early access, I did play on PC. So the only example that I could think of was Metal Gear Ground Zeroes as an early access model. Ground Zeroes came out 2015, I think, or 2014. I don't really remember. It's been so long. But yeah, that game came out. It wasn't really a game. It was more of a tech demo for what would eventually become Metal Gear 5 Phantom Pain, which came out, I think, 2 years after the fact. My dates could be a little off, but this is all off the head, so I should have Googled all that, right? Anyway, the article in question suggests that Dark Souls is a classic, right? It's considered a cult classic, and obviously FromSoft has springboarded Dark Souls into multiple spin-offs. Spin-offs might be the wrong term, but games of a similar ilk, like Bloodborne, like Sekiro, like Elden Ring, and as well as other Dark Souls games, right? There's Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3. And we also had a Demon Souls remake as well, with their respective DLCs on top of that. But I mean, Dark Souls 1 wasn't, it wasn't a blockbuster. It didn't make a ton of money. It came out around the same time as Gears of War 2, and that game outsold it by God knows how much, right? But if Dark Souls had came out in the early access form, similar to games like Power World or Enshrouded, it probably could have seen more success, gained more favor, and produced more content overall, right? Because they would have spent more time on the game. There are early access games that are over 10 years old, and they're still in early access, believe it or not. And these games are constantly worked on and constantly updated. And because people keep, new players keep buying these games, the games kind of like, just kind of have like how would you call it? Like just recycling funds. Like they just keep getting money in, right? As the game gains favor, instead of just hoping that the game does really well in its, in its launch week. So that's what they're kind of like recommending. And I see a argument here, but I don't know how that would have worked. I mean, if the article is assuming that they had tried this in 2012, I think it would not have worked at all. But if the article is assuming that it happened now, let's say 2024, maybe, sure, it would have worked because the internet is just a more vast place than it was before, and there are more PC players than there was in 12 years ago. I don't know. Like, what do you guys think? Like, what's your stance on early access? What do you guys think about this article? We'll dive deeper. I just want to introduce the topic and kind of shine a little light on like what I think, but I don't want to get too deep into it and talk for like 20 minutes. So, what is your? I know Gunnar, you've played some early access stuff, and what do you think?
Yeah. So, I played early access. I played Baldur's Gate. That was early access. That's obviously a game, very popular game. I played a lot. I used to be pretty dedicated to Final Fantasy 14. Now, one could argue that the MMO scene, their idea of early access is different than something like Power Worlds, because 14, an expansion, Endwalker, let's say, or Shadowbringers, whatever, pick your expansion, that's finished. Like the expansion is done. You're just paying for the ability to play it faster, and Square Enix is gladly going to take your money. So I played games like that. Primarily, I'm a console player, so early access, which is kind of an incorrect statement, even though it's coming out of my mouth, isn't really a thing, but it's now becoming a thing. And I think I'll just be the first one to talk about it. Early access is kind of the word. The word is kind of being twisted by certain companies because now they're using early access as give us more money and you get to play it a whole 3 days earlier. Ubisoft is really big on this. EA is really big on this. Their new not EA's, Ubisoft's new Star Wars game. If you spend the fucking egregious $136, you get early access. Now, early access in that case is more so you get to play the game before the pleb who's paying $70 for this game. So, unfortunately, that term is being misconstrued and twisted by the corpos at AAA gaming to just mean I get more money from you. But if we go back to what I think is the more realistic use of the term early access, I don't really have much of a problem with it because they're most of these guys are pretty honest about what you're getting. They let you know, hey, look, this game is unfinished. We are letting you know that. We're not lying to you about it. You will experience bugs. We'd like you to experience bugs, actually, so you can report on them and we can correct them. Games like Power World are pretty synonymous with huge patch notes where they'll take a look at and they'll fix and rectify a myriad of issues that have been reported on by the player base. And I think it is good for like an indie developer who doesn't have the budget to kind of hire game testers to find these things out. They're basically allowing the community to beta test their game while giving them a small amount of money. And then once the game is finished, like you own the game forever. They're not going to charge you for the full release of Power World, for example. So I don't know. The term early access is like in flux right now, but I don't think it's inherently a bad thing. As far as the Souls games benefiting from it, I mean, I guess. I mean, the good thing about the Souls games is that they've always been complete video games, right? It's like when I boot up a Souls game, or Sekiro, or Bloodborne, or Elden Ring, I know I'm getting a full game. And I feel like with early access, you're agreeing to getting some of the game, and then eventually you'll get all of the game. And me, it's just like, bro, I just want the whole game. Like, I just want to play from start to finish, and I come back if there's an expansion or if I have an itch to redo a playthrough. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's good, but it's also being used for bad. If that makes any sense. So that's my initial thoughts on how I feel about early access, the concept anyway.
For me, seeing as the person was referring to Dark Souls specifically when it comes to early, if they had access to if it came out at this time with early access, I'm leaning more to no. I don't think that would have been good for Dark Souls in general. The reason why I don't think it would be good for Dark Souls in general, because I think Dark Souls has, and this is going to be a bit hypocritical, but I'm going to try to make it make sense as much as possible. Dark Souls' flaws is its beauty. I cannot play Dark Souls for the life of me because of the flaws. However, the people who were the fan base who did grow to appreciate what Dark Souls is and what kind of game it is. If Dark Souls, especially in this time, in this day and age, came out as early access, I think we would have ultimately gotten a very different Dark Souls because of what the game offers and how the game is played and just the overall build of the game. I think maybe, let's say, the majority of the community would actually recommend that the game either gets toned down for its difficulty or beefed up for or get the combat beefed up, because Dark Souls has a pretty slow combat. It's not some quick hack and slash kind of game. You have to be smart in what you do. But even then, even the combat for the original Dark Souls game wasn't perfect either. I've watched you guys play, and I've seen some clunkiness in it, and it's like, this shit sucks. But again, you guys watching your faces and how you enjoy the fight, regardless of the clunkiness, that flaw, you guys was looking at it as its beauty. Like, this monster is moving, it doesn't make any sense on how he's moving. But you know what? I got a challenge, and I like it. That's how you guys that's the energy that you guys radiated when I would watch you guys play, especially in the college rooms. So no, I don't think early access will help Dark Souls, because I think it would have subjected Dark Souls to the majority of players who really can't play the game. And then the developers are going to want to change certain things because they want more players to play. And I do think it is absolutely okay that Dark Souls came out and really didn't get much traction, because look at it now. You know, like, it may be the game that it is the game that started all these other soul-like games. Like, the moment the moment a developer comes out with a game that has difficult combat, pretty slow combat, the enemies are whatever. The moment it looks or can be compared to a Souls game, it's automatically labeled, oh, this is a Souls game. This is a soul-like game. Or, you know, that shows that overall, regardless of its initial sales and its initial, I guess, reception to the community, to the gaming community, it still had a very significant impact for what it was. I think early access would have allowed Dark Souls to be watered down and ultimately a diluted video game in comparison to what it was in the past, or how it's become so iconic of a type of video game that it is now. I think it would have done more damage than good for what Dark Souls is.
No,
that makes sense.
No, I get what you're saying. No, that makes sense. That does. Yeah, I mean, in a world, in a modern video game landscape where there are such things as patches and, hot fixes and whatnot. Yeah, Dark Souls kind of stems from an era where the game was the game, and we hear your complaints, and we're going to fix that with the sequel. Now, for anybody who's been deep in the Dark Souls, you might say, well, hey, you're an idiot because Dark Souls 2 was not a step up. And yeah, hey, different team. It had its qualities to it. I will agree the sequel was rough, but Dark Souls 3, some consider it the best Souls game, period. Even though we have like Elden Ring now, some people still say Dark Souls 3 is the superior game. So clearly they learned from what people had issues with in Dark Souls 1 and 2, and they addressed those in 3. So if we go to, what Wolf said with early access, would Dark Souls 3 have been received as well as it did if it had that if this first game had an early access.
Well,
period.
Dark Souls 3
know.
wouldn't exist. In my opinion.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So
Okay.
here's my take on it. I think I don't. First of all, I'm not against early access. I think early access is a good business model for smaller studios to
Yeah.
try to finish their game, because I'm sure there are hundreds, maybe even thousands of game projects that have been shit canned over the last, we'll just say, 30 years that could have seen the light of day had early access existed in whatever time frame that these games were being developed in. One example would be Mega Man Legends 3. That's a game that I wanted, that they were trying to revive it and launch it on the 3DS a million years ago, and the game wasn't getting the traction that they wanted. There was some political stuff going on, behind the scenes with Kenji Fune and Capcom executives. But I think that if that was trying to be done now, if Mega Man Legends 3 was attempted now, and they were like, okay, we're going to adopt the early access model, and it's going to be crowdfunded, so we're going to produce a certain amount of the game, we're going to launch it, you guys are going to pay $9.99 for it, and if we make enough and we get a good feedback, then we will continue developing the game with future updates. And then we'll have a full launch once the game has reached a certain level of completion. In that alternate universe, I would have gotten my Mega Man Legends 3. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. And there is a demo that exists. We don't have access to it. It was never officially released. Unfortunately, I don't really understand why. I always think back to the time, why not just release the demo, and just get fan feedback and see what comes back. I mean, you could have even charged for it, right? I would have paid $3 for the demo. Why not?
I mean, you said it. Fucking Konami did it with.
Yeah, they did it with Metal Gear and Ground Zeroes, right? Where
that is just
they
the demo.
launched. It was a tech demo for what Metal Gear Metal Gear 5 was gonna be, and that was a $30 game, right? And I remember I was working at GameStop at the time, and people bought the game thinking it was the new Metal Gear, and they came back the same day, and it was like, "What is this shit?" And me, I'm like, "Well, you did pay $30. Games are $60." I mean, that was like the first red flag, but whatever. So yeah, I don't know, but early access, I'm not against it. I've compiled a short list. Early access games that I've played: Power World, Enshrouded, The Forest, Lethal Company, Project Zomboid, 7 Days to Die. The last two that I mentioned are games that have been in early access for over 10 years. Project Zomboid and 7 Days to Die have been in early access since before 2014, I think. And they're still labeled early access, which is crazy. And that's because they're constantly updating the game, constantly changing the game. But the price of the game has never changed. And those who have adopted the game at any point in time always have access to the full game. That's kind of dope. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. Some people say, oh, it's bullshit. Just, finish the game. But it's like, some games can't be, there is no such thing as finishing the game. Like, there's always something more you can add to it. You could say that about any project, any artistic project. But I don't know. With those games, it kind of just makes sense. It just works for those games. I don't know. But taking it back to Dark Souls, I think if Dark Souls was launched at early access, Dark Souls 2 and 3 would have never happened, and they would have just expanded on Dark Souls, the original concept of Dark Souls, and just kept adding stuff to it. So what would have eventually become what we know as Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3, along with all the DLC attached to it, would have just been add-ons to the Dark Souls game. Like, Dark Souls would have been like
expansion.
Exactly. Dark Souls would have been like what Project Zomboid is today, or what 7 Days to Die is today. It's just Dark Souls, bro. Like, and you just get this big thing, this big old game to play. I think the presumption of the article is if early access was adopted back when Dark Souls was first a thing and it met its success, we would have had Elden Ring already. Like, Dark Souls would have just been Elden Ring eventually. And I don't know if I could see that reality. I don't know if that's true. But I think there's a beauty to these games having a definitive middle, like a beginning, middle, and end. An example, I'll take it to cinema for a quick second. My favorite horror movie is The Thing. There's only one The Thing movie, just one, and it has a cliffhanger ending. And I can watch that movie. I mean, the movie is awesome, first of all, but I can watch that movie over and over and over again because it has a distinct beginning, middle, and end. Right? It tells the story of these characters, and the rest is kind of up to your assumption. Right? It's up to your imagination as to what happened before the events of the movie or after the events of the movie. And and then they did release a prequel to The Thing. I ignore that because it's like, no, it just doesn't work. But if you just look at The Thing, 1979's The Thing, it's perfect. But if you look at something like another movie I enjoy, John Wick, great movie, the first one, was fine. Like John Wick 1 was perfect. It was a great movie. Right? I stand by that. If you like action or whatever. Once John Wick 2 and 3 happened, and I didn't even see 4, it was like the allure, the intrigue, everything went out the window because now you're adding layers to this character that didn't need it. Like a little mystery goes a long way. And having a definitive end to like an arc or a story it's just better because if you extend things too much, it's like eating what's a food you like? Like I don't know. I like shrimp. Like shrimp is delicious. I could eat a giant bowl of shrimp, right? But the 50th shrimp that I eat will never be as good as the first like 4. It will never touch that, that pleasure point the same.
I agree with that.
So for me, it's kind of the same. Where it's like the Dark Souls games are each individual Dark Souls game has its own fan base. Like there's division within the Dark Souls community, especially with 2. There's like Dark Souls 2 defenders. Like Dark Souls 2 is a great game. I think it's a great game, but it's worse amongst its trilogy partners. My favorite is the first one, but a lot of people are like 3 is the most polished. Sure, but 1 is better, right? And that's just my opinion. And I could talk about why I think it's better, but that's not really important. What's important is each game stands alone and stands, I think, firmly as like a great entry, and that includes games like Bloodborne, that includes games like Sekiro and Elden Ring. And if Dark Souls had early access, we may not have never gotten Bloodborne or Sekiro or Elden Ring. So I don't know. I'm pretty happy with the timeline that we're living in, where we have these like this great collection of games that some people can't even like. There are people out there who can't beat any of them, right?
Me?
Nah, you can if you wanted to, bro. But I don't know. I think that's awesome.
I can't play those games. But you know what? I will not take away what the games have done for the community, and I will not take away the enjoyment that I see other people have. Like when I see somebody really truly say they enjoy the Dark Souls games, I think for the most part, they're talking with true genuinity. Like they really enjoy these games. Because to me, it takes a lot to enjoy a game like that. Right? For me, it takes a lot. But when I hear people praise the game, I feel like the game comes with this true genuinity of like, okay, I'm not praising this game because I want to be a part of a particular cult or a particular group of people, or I'm praising this game because, or they are praising that game because they truly enjoyed the game. And with what I understand of how early access works, which I agree with BlankaKong, it would have been great in early access in the terms of being able to expand the game, being able to, okay, Dark Souls 2 would probably be called Dark Souls, I don't know, Reincarnation, for example, which is just a whole expansion to Dark Souls 1. And then Dark Souls 3 coming out would be a whole expansion to Dark Souls with new maps, new areas, kind of like how, the MMO genre works with expansions to keep the game going. But I also feel like it would have hit in a sense of where it comes down to the critics. And I know that Dark Souls, when it first came out, was not accepted so easily. It took a while, but the critics, in my opinion, would have, if it was an early access game, would have, if the developers cared enough, would have ultimately changed it and take away what makes Dark Souls.
I don't know if that's necessarily true,
and
considering Miyazaki's been pretty like Miyazaki and his team have been pretty like they've dug their heels into the ground as far as like maintaining the art style, the difficulty, and the overall allure of Dark Souls or Souls-like. They've been pretty consistent, and they've received a lot of like at least a lot of internet backlash, which is like, you know.
In that regard, I do respect them as game developers, because I do feel like, I believe I said something similar to this in another podcast, but I do feel like a game developer should have the right to develop the game in the vision that they see the game in, and leave it up to the public to enjoy it or don't enjoy it, instead of taking criticism. But I feel like early access, if a video game comes out in early access, that's like it's like the game is a clay statue in the process of being made into something, into
that's
a sculpture.
A great analogy.
Yeah.
And I really do think that there are more people who prefer a easier, watered down game than what Dark Souls brought to the table. I feel like Dark Souls is a video game that's challenging. I feel like it's a video game that tests patience. It's a video game that it brings a rigorous skill to the table. And I'm not saying that I'm a player who don't have any of that. I just don't. What I don't in Dark Souls overall is the patience part. I'm just not patient enough to play Dark Souls. But those who are patient enough to play Dark Souls, I think can play any video game. And that's what a video game is to me. A video game where you can get lost in the world because the story doesn't tell you shit. Like the story isn't so heavy based. Like it doesn't have like major cutscenes that tell. You gotta really dig into it. You gotta be listening to what the characters say. You gotta understand the scenario that you find yourself in order for you to get the story together. So already, that if you care about the story of Dark Souls, you're paying attention. You're not just like, oh, cutscene, characters talking, blah blah blah. No, you're paying attention, because the little bit I played half of Elden Ring, and I paid attention through all of it. And to be honest, I still don't know the story of Elden Ring. I just know that you're some abandoned guy who was trying to get back his honor or his body or his soul or something. But that's all I know. That's it. But the story is so.
I just imagine like a voice actress with like the British voice acting, you know, instead of like arise, risen, or arise, ashen one. It's like arise, abandoned guy.
That's pretty much what I heard.
Fair enough. You're
like,
not wrong.
Okay.
It's just funny.
I'm forsaken. Yeah. Like, you know, but
Oh, we just lost.
If you don't pay enough attention,
oh, he's back.
You may lose. Okay. If you don't pay attention to the gameplay, you're gonna get your ass handed to you. So you gotta pay attention to the combat. You gotta pay attention to your skills. You gotta pay attention to the armor that you're wearing, because too much armor makes you too heavy. Not light armor makes your HP or your defenses very low. You have to pay attention to the type of weapon you're using, because it burns up your stamina. The kind of shield you're carrying, because it burns up your stamina. Like, there's so much detail to the game that, regardless of me saying, okay, it's not a genre of games where I care to play, I will not sit here and be a hypocrite and say I don't see the beauty within the video game itself.
It requires a lot of commitment, for sure. You have to be committed to a game like that to play through and see it to its end. You have to be all in, 100%. But to take it back to the early access piece, you know, I don't know if you have anything to say Gunner, I just wanted to point this one thing out.
I'll go after, yeah, because mine might change the flow of the conversation, so I'll let you
Yeah, so like if you
finish.
played, if you bought a copy of Dark Souls 1 on PS3 or 360, and you put it into your console, and your console was not connected to the internet, and so you receive no updates, and you just play the day one launch version of that game. There are so many changes between that version of the game and whatever the latest version of the game is. Like, there's like performance updates, there's like so many nerfs and buffs. Like, there's so many changes that like it's arguable that like it's a different game. Like, one could argue. I mean, I remember when we were playing Elden Ring, when that first came out, me and Gunnar were talking about just general Elden Ring stuff, and like how he was playing like the super OP wizard build and all that with like the fire and sorcery blade or whatever, and like that all that stuff is nerfed. Like, that's gone, right? Like, the only way you're gonna get that form of the game is if you have a hard copy of the game and you delete all your data for it right on your local console, and you just play it without patches day one, and you could never play online, right? That's one of the, I think, bad things about early access is that like certain versions of the game kind of get lost, and so people will only recognize the final product. They'll only ever recognize the final version of the game, version 47 or whatever it is. And I don't know. I think there's something kind of cool about having access to version 1.0, and like this is the launch version of the game. I don't know. I think that's cool. It's like a relic of history, and like being able to compare the two is pretty interesting. And if this game was early access, I think that would have been lost, because I can only imagine how many updates something like that would have received.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time. Good point. Yeah, very good point.
So you were going to mention something, Gunnar?
Yes. So, like, if you look at the article, kind of like a quote from the developer of No Rest for the Wicked kind of caught my attention, and I don't necessarily agree with it. He says the No Rest for the Wicked developer also defended that even companies like Sony and Nintendo could embrace this practice, helping more AAA devs polish their products before 1.0 releases. Look, I'm sorry, I'm not simping for Sony, Nintendo, or Microsoft. You are multi-billion-dollar companies. Get your shit together and have your game developed. I get if it's an indie guy who's working in his room, he's the producer, the developer, the voice actor, the modeler, the whole 9 yards. That guy, sure. He's fine to go on early access to maybe get more funding out there, get his games released, get his games noticed, and then develop the game as normal. But Nintendo, bro, if Nintendo put Pokemon Scarlet and Violet in early access, people would know not to buy it. So, I mean, now on the flip side, if I'm going to play devil advocate with myself, early access could benefit these games, because then we wouldn't have these huge development cycles of 10 years with unregulated hype behind it. So a perfect example, at least for me, is Cyberpunk, right? Cyberpunk was announced and took 10 years to come out. And then when it came out, it was in such a horrid state that Sony of all people, were issuing refunds on digital purchases of the game. And they don't issue refunds for shit. So one can make an argument that if Cyberpunk released on an early access game, one, those problems would have never been problems, because if you bought Cyberpunk as an early access game, you would have known, all right, if I crash, let me report that. If, this guy's T-posing in the corner, he's not supposed to do that, I understand. It's an early access game. Let me report that. Not, oh, gee, I spent $10. I mean, $10, I wish. I spent $60, $65 on my PlayStation 4 version of Cyberpunk. This game is unplayable. You lied, CDPR. So, on one hand, if you're a AAA studio, like, bro, early access is your development team, right? You have access to a ton of resources that early access shouldn't be a thing for you. But on the other hand, what do we might not have gotten the cyberpunk in the release it is if it was early access, or Forspoken, or Suicide Squad, or insert AAA garbage that died within a year game here. Maybe early access could have saved those games, or at least warned the general public that, you know what, this ain't for me, Chief. So I just saw that line and was just like, I don't know. I don't want to give like Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft an out by going, oh, if they had early access, they could benefit from it too. It's like, bro, it's Nintendo. Like, no.
I agree with you in that respect. I do feel like when it comes to certain franchises, especially if it's a what do you call it, first party franchise, it should already have a certain level of mastery by the developers, and the developers should already understand what their fan base is looking for and how to deliver to the fan base. You mentioned Pokemon, much like before we started the podcast. I feel like there's certain levels that Pokemon should be at this point that it is not. But in the end of the day, sales is sales, and
Yep.
they're still grossing extremely high, regardless. But I do feel like it is time. Like at some point, you got to take ownership of the BS you're putting out in the market. Because Scarlet and Violet, as much as I love Pokemon, and I don't even think the Pokemon themselves or the idea of Scarlet and Violet is bad. I think the overall game has a lot of technical issues.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's been fixed because I've stopped playing it, really momentarily, because I'm trying to get back into really being in video games. But I don't feel like a game like that should be early access. I feel like they need to just put it out there and give the people, give the fan base what they deserve from sticking with a franchise for 20 plus years, especially the older fan base, and even for the younger ones. Like at this point, I don't expect, for example, my 9-year-old son to be interested in a game where you have these complex monster sprites, they're jumping at each other, and you call that I don't know, a fire punch. But yet you see Charizard bouncing back and forth. That doesn't make sense to me. It's time to fix certain things about that. But I digress. I think early access is a great business practice for video games, or for video games that they are trying to see if it will hit. Like if you come out with a new IP, for example, and you make early access, I would agree to make it. If you're trying a new IP and you put it out as early access, I would agree with that 100%, because you really don't know where the game is going to go from there. And having it early access, it may be helpful to give the people, or to give the player base, or to hear out what the player base have to say about your game.
Yeah.
I also agree that, yeah, I support the indie market in that regard. I definitely agree that the indie market will benefit huge to it, more than, say, the AAA or the multi-million-dollar video game companies. But, I don't agree with him 100%, but I also don't disagree with him 100%. And that's only because I do see the good and bad in early access. And I think early access I feel like it brings more good than it does bad, depending on what we're talking about. You see, like this topic is specifically Dark Souls, so I think it's more, my personal opinion, it's more bad for Dark Souls than good. But I think a game, like let's say we go way back. What was the shooter that we played?
Fuse.
The four of us played? Fuse. If Fuse came out as early access in today's day and age, it would have helped Fuse. I personally feel so. I think it would have helped a game like Fuse. because Fuse had a lot of like Fuse really needed it really needed like a push in certain things, and maybe if it came out in today's day and age with early access, it would have gotten the criticism it needed for them to push to develop a better game.
Okay, yeah.
So
that's
no, those are all fair points. Yeah, I don't know, man. I think it's partially the boomer in me. Like, I just want a game to be like, when I pay for it, I'd like for it to just be in a finished state. It's like early access only works for things like video games. It could never work for like a TV show or a movie. Like, hey,
but not to cut you off, but are we kind of getting that with movies? Like, now everything's part 1, Dune, part 1, Dune part 2. Are we kind of getting that now? Because I saw the original Dune. The whole movie came out in one chunk.
I mean, maybe, but I don't know, because early access implies that it's like in an unfinished state. The whole like cinematic universe business model that the movie industry is doing now is more of a way of milking more out of the one cow that you have. So
yeah,
I think it's more of that than it is. You know, we wanna hedge our bets and like not put all our eggs into one basket with this particular franchise or this particular project, which is what early access really is. It's like, hey, I have an idea. Let's build something. Let's see if it garners interest, and let's put it out there as an early access title. And if it's received well, cool, we'll continue working on it. And if it's not, then we'll cut our losses, which would have been significantly less than us finishing the fucking game in 3 years and it flopping anyway, right? So it's good in that sense. And I think, should more studios adopt that style of game development? I don't know. Like, I think, I don't know. Okay, it depends. Like, there's two lenses I'm looking at this from. So I'm looking at this from, there's like the business lens, which is like, okay, if I'm a developer or if I'm like a, studio head or whatever, I'm going to want to protect my business. So I want to make as much money as possible utilizing the least amount of resources as possible. While maintaining work-life balance and like healthy work atmosphere, all that, right? Right, yeah. Right, like, I'm not going to, okay, Bob, you're going to have to just work till you die and then, Jim's going to replace you. Like, no, of course not. I'm not advocating for that. But there is a balance, right? And so any business wants to make more money than less money, obviously. So, like, early access is a way of doing that. And early access is a way of, like, accurately scoping out the potential success or failure of a project. It's not like you're putting out a demo and reading reviews, because a review is a review. A review is not a purchase. Like, people are quick to say stuff, but the moment you got to put money down, it's like, whoa, you get a very different result. So I think early access is great for the business side of things. From a consumer standpoint, it can be very good because it means that, your voice is being heard, your money is going further than it maybe would have otherwise. Because, okay, I'll just use a real life example. Power World. I paid like $20 for that game, right? $22, something like that. I got easily 200 hours out of that game. So for me, I got way more than my value that I invested, and I'm going to get more because there's going to be updates that the game is going to receive over time. So that $20 is going to go even further into the future, which is awesome. And I forget the Pocket Pair. Pocket Pair, the company behind Power World, are really passionate about delivering a great game and delivering great updates and really listening to fan feedback, and that's amazing. I don't know if Sony or Nintendo or EA or any of these big companies would treat it that way. I feel like it would be kind of slimy. Like, they would put out a early access game and then be like, okay, we got our money. Let's cut. Like, it's a lot of money, but it's just not enough money. so we're just gonna cut the project. You know, like I feel like they would do some shit like that because Square Enix did it with Tomb Raider, right? Like the game sold pretty well, but they still sold Crystal Dynamics away, right? They still cut off that part of their company. They cut off that arm because sure it was profitable, but you know it just wasn't enough money. And it's like I don't know. That's frustrating because if I was, you know, I like Tomb Raider, but like I'm not a Tomb Raider fan. But if I was a Tomb Raider fan, I'd be like, wow, like okay, so fuck me then, cool. Like I don't know, I would feel super betrayed. So I don't know. That might happen more with early access in the AAA space. I'm more than okay with early access in the indie space because it's like Gunnar said, it's like a few guys working on a project. It's a passion project. It's not like, you know, there's like 1,000 executives that are like sucking all of the fucking profitability of this project. It's just like, you know, a studio or whatever, which is the way it should be in the first place. So I don't know. I'm kind of like, I'm a fence sitter on this one. I don't know. I don't know how to feel.
I think it's overall a net positive. I think early access is overall a net positive. Definitely, just like everything good in this world, AAA devs are just like, how can I milk people of their money? So that's why we get the play 3 days earlier if you spend $100 more. What a great deal!
Yeah, that's not real early access. That's bullshit.
No, it is. Yeah. They will use that title. That's why I opened with that title's kind of being twisted into something else. But you know, I do. You know, we have successes like Power World. There's another one mentioned. Oh, Baldur's Gate, which is a AAA game that was truly in early access. Because you know, Baldur's Gate is divided into 3 chapters. When the game first came out, you only had Act 1. Then Act 2 was added, Act 3 was added, then it fully released. So that's an example of a AAA game that used the early access model.
You see, but that's another example of like, if you ever seen interviews with the guy who heads Larian Studios, he's like a super down-to-earth, super passionate guy who like really cares about the game. And like he even mentioned that like he doesn't read online rhetoric because if he feels like it's going to influence the purity of his vision for the game. And I'm like, that's sick. Yeah. Like, I want people like that.
Smart man.
I want people like that working on these games because I know that we're going to get a better game, and I'm happy to support a project for people like that. You know what I mean? I feel like the early access, it'll be abused in the hands of like certain companies.
Most certainly.
And so that's what I don't want, and that's what I'm afraid of. But unfortunately, I mean, listen, they have they can just do it, right? Like nothing's stopping them from doing it. God knows that fucking microtransactions and loot boxes aren't being regulated in North America, so it's fucking wild, wild west. Like they can do whatever the fuck they want when it comes to like distribution of content and all that, and how much they charge and how they restrict it and all that. So there's nothing I can say on this podcast or do in real life to change any of that. I just kind of have to accept for things the way they are. Listen, I've been buying PlayStation 1 games. I'm gonna be fine. It's just, you know, I wish things weren't. I wish there wasn't so much slimy negativity in the gaming industry today. And it's always been about making money, but like something about the past felt a little more grounded and down to earth than it does today. Today is all about like, you know, we got to get our year-over-year percentage at, you know, at a minimum of 5% over. It's like, okay, cool, but like, are we still profitable though? Like, are things still healthy? Like, does the executive really need that $2 million bonus? Like, let's be real. Like, what does he really do? You know what I mean? Like, that stuff that bothers me. So,
nah, man, nah, you got it.
Thanks. I'll put it in my pocket.
Nah, it's just.
But I do see the positives of you know, this guy. There's like a I guess this is the guy, right? This is the developer, Thomas Muller.
I believe so.
Like
yeah,
he
yeah,
says,
yeah.
he uses an analogy that makes a lot of sense. Where was it? It was like women pregnancy something. Yeah, nine women can't make a baby in a month and all that. That makes a lot of sense. Like, games need time to be good. Right? So if early access is a way for us to just get a good product at the end, as long as we get the product at the end, I'm happy, right? I'm just afraid of like people taking the money and running with it and like not delivering on their promise.
Yeah, I mean, which does happen with early access games. If you go to Steam, there's like, oh god, thousands of early access games that are literally just asset flips and under the guise of this game will be developed further, and it's just some people trying to make a quick buck off a subpar game, and if they get one guy that drops the $50 for their game, that's a win.
What's that zombie game that died in like 2 days? The day before, the day last, Friday after next.
The day after, the day. I think it was the day. Such a fucking stupid. That should have been early access. That's fucking stupid title. It's like, I think it's the day after. I'll have
to look at. Well, what are your thoughts, Wolf, on all that?
Well, like I said, I agree with you guys overall. I do believe that early access does bring a lot of positivity to the community, and it does bring positivity for the business practice in itself. However, much like Gunnar said, it is being twisted and monetized in a different way with certain games that say early access when it really should be called, I don't know, early release.
I think
but it does also. But I think it all depends on the kind of game it is, and then also you don't want it to be something that's like every video game to come out is early access.
That's kind of what I'm afraid of too.
I definitely
it's
don't
like
want that.
Now we just don't get finished games until who knows how long. Because if games, let's say, okay, let's look at the Pokemon games. The Pokemon game development cycles, I think, is like 2 years each, right? Like they spend max 2 years to like push these games out because they have like an overlap. I think 2025 is like 2024 is the 1 year we're not getting. Actually, no, because 2023 we didn't get a Pokemon release. We got DLC, but we didn't get like a full game release. And then this year we're also not getting a full game release. So the Legends A through Z or whatever they're calling that one, the new Pokemon X and Y basically, that is going to be like, I think, the first truly developed Pokemon game that we've had in like God knows how long.
Yeah, because it's not supposed to come out this year.
Yeah, it's coming out next year, which presumably is going to be out for like holiday next year. So we still got like another year and a half, most likely, for that game. But yeah, like if they did early access for Pokemon, sure, we would get a better Pokemon game at the end. But like, how long would they take to get that game out? You know what I mean? Like, I feel like from a 2 year development cycle, it'll turn into like a 6 year development cycle because they would just kind of rest on their hands. Like they're like, all right, well, we got time. You know, we've already made so much money.
What it does, it creates a cop out.
Yeah.
It creates a cop out because if one major, especially if it's a major title, and it's successful from that, then you're going to get a whole bunch of other titles or a whole bunch of other companies who's going to try to practice. And we've seen like this before, right? Like with Fortnite, there's a lot of video games that's similar to Fortnite because of the success of Fortnite. We've seen a lot of video games come out like Dark Souls because of the uniqueness of Dark Souls, right? Power's success part of Power's success is its comparison to Pokemon.
Oh, 100%.
So you can kind of, you can say that a part of its success is writing off the Pokemon name.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So it's like we've seen this before. So we know that even if you look at mobile games, if you picked 100 random mobile games off of the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, it's anime chicks with big breasts, right? Am I wrong?
No,
I couldn't tell you I don't play mobile games, but I believe you.
Right.
For anybody who knows, Nikki is one of the most popular mobile games right now, and it's
because
full of
it's,
plot.
Oh, it's full of plot. A lot of plot.
You said boobs wrong.
Deep plot. You know, so And that is absolutely true. It's like it's a lot of anime style what's it called? Hero collectors is what they're called.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of that on the app stores, and because it is a type of mobile game that works, right? The mobile company they can release a game. Mobile games to me are never finished because they're constantly being updated every week or every month or whatever the cycle the company goes with. So they're never finished in my personal opinion. Um, but then they release, like 20 characters. You have the generic main character, which is usually a guy with brown hair or black hair. And then you get your big boob chicks and, your little child that everybody that, anime fanboys love to see occasionally. The little narrow.
What are those called? Those are called like lolis,
characters.
Right?
Yeah.
Lollies or lolis or whatever
okay.
they're called, right? But they all come out with the same model. Not that the characters all look the same, but they come out with the same generic build. They hit their success for 2 years or 3 years, and then they shut the game down because they made their money.
Yeah.
Right.
Don't even get me started on mobile games. Mobile games, in my opinion, are natively predatory. Like they prey on people's weaknesses, and exploits their weakness to want to spend money. And it's all designed to like extract as much out of you as possible and keep you as blind as possible to the expenditure. It's fucking disgusting.
Right.
Like I hate mobile games. I'm like, you guys fucking suck. Like I hate all of it. But to answer the, go ahead. I'm sorry.
What I was saying was, I can honestly say like the Honkai games is one of the what's the developers that do the Honkai game? Moyo Ho or whatever.
Moyo Ho. Yeah. Go with that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
More hoes.
Right. Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, it's not wrong.
They put in effort in their quote unquote mobile games, and they've developed themselves to a point where now they can be on console games. But yeah, that's what I'm afraid where early access becomes, where is like we're just gonna put this shitty beta version out there. We're gonna say it's in development for 6 years. People are gonna continue to donate to us so we can continue the development. But you know what? Fuck it. After 6 years, we just shut the shit down and it's like, hey, look, we couldn't complete the game because of whatever X reason as to what they choose to go with from their PR division. So it's like that's where I'm afraid early access can end up being. And it only takes 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 games to truly meet real high peak success from early access. And then we're gonna start seeing that all these other businesses, start to step into that realm and try to make their success from that. So it's a very it's a slippery slope. Or you can say it's like walking on thin ice. You can either successfully cross that lake, or you can fall into the frozen water and fuck it up.
I was gonna say The Day Before is the official name of the game. So there's that. But like I think, and I'll end with just 2 points, and then we can wrap up with final thoughts. Early access to me in the AAA space is basically what games as like what do they call it? Games as a service or service games or live service games. Those are basically early access games, or that's what early access games would be in a AAA space. It's like, okay, we're going to give you a base experience, and we're going to give you 3 characters, and you're going to give us all your money, and if you want more, you have to pay us more. And like we're just going to nickel and dime you. It's like, that's what I don't want. I don't want live service games, because I feel like we're just going to get more fucking live service games. That's 1. 2, the last point is my problem is people work off of incentives. So when you go to work, no matter what you do, if you work retail, if you flip burgers, if you work in construction, if you work in sales, if you work as a doctor or a lawyer or a cop or whatever your job is, work is work. So I respect all of it. But there's a reason why you get paid after you finish working. Because if you get paid before, you are going to do a worse job than you would had you gotten paid, appropriately. Like after you, that's what, Friday's your payday. Okay. Make sure you clock in and out, right? Make sure you get your time in, or make sure you hit your sales, or whatever that looks like. Because you're not going to get paid unless you exercise the job itself. Like you need to do your job, right? And I feel like early access is kind of like the opposite. Like if you got paid before the job, it's like, okay, Johnny, I'm going to pay you to fix my fence. It's going to cost $300, right? Cool, I'm just going to give you the $300. How long is it going to take Johnny to finish that fence? Whereas if I told, okay, Johnny, I'm going to give you $50 to start. I'm going to pay for the supplies. You get the other $250 once the job is done. He's going to be incentivized to get that fence fixed appropriately and as fast as possible in order to get his $250 so he can move on to the next job. But if I give him his money up front, he's going to drag his fucking feet. Like, you know what I mean? Like, people are going to naturally do that. Yeah. And so that's my only point of contention, or my main point of contention with early access, is that it's going to incentivize people dragging their feet, people scamming, and by people I mean executives and air quotes, major companies. They're just going to scam their audience members, and they're just going to fuck us over even more. They're already bitching about sales plateauing in the industry, and it's like, okay, I guess we got to fire half our artists. It's like, really? Okay, Phil Spencer, like, you're still employed though. You know what I mean? Like, you're not, your job isn't on the line here, right? Okay. You know what I mean? So like, it's things like that that kind of like annoy me. It kind of worry me. I feel like early access should only be something that indie developers can utilize, because it's like a loan. It's like, if I don't make enough money for a house, I have the option to get a loan and work my way to paying off a house, because I don't make enough to really buy a house outright. Like maybe somebody who, is just wealthy, right? I think that, people who are passionate about developing games should have the access to develop games, and early access is a way to do that. And I don't know. That's just kind of my stance on it. And I don't know. Maybe you guys agree, maybe you disagree with some of it, or most of it, or none of it. I don't know. But yeah, those are my final thoughts.
My final thoughts would align with yours. I agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't have much to add. I think we're going to see whether we like it or not. I don't think the Souls games are going to be part of that, to tie it back to the article.
I don't think so.
I think Miyazaki and the boys, they're going to do what they're going to do, right? The DLC, as of the filming of this, is on the horizon in June. That's done. It's been planned out. It's good. The inevitable Souls-like, whether it's Dark Souls 4 or whatever, that's going to be what it is. But I think as far as early access as a kind of viable model, for better or for worse, that is becoming more mainstream.
True.
And I think as if you've been listening to this podcast for long, you've heard our thoughts as to why we think it can lead to good, and it could save us from horrible overhyped games that have bombed or have been super mid. And it's going to be abused. We're starting to see the abuse already, and the scumbags of EA and yep.
Sorry, I had a cough.
Yeah, from the from the scumbag indie to the scumbag quad A developers.
Skull and bones. Got another cough. Sorry.
It's bad out here. Yeah, allergy season, So again, I always try to put this into a podcast. Be a smart consumer. Be a smart buyer of media. At the end of the day, they are not entitled to your money. Never give them your money unless you are 100% sure you want to make this purchase. And you will make a bad purchase. I've done it. We've all done it. But just be smart about it, Do your research. We live in the internet age. There is no excuse to not be informed on things. So
yeah, do your part and research.
I'll leave it on that.
No, that's a good thing. That's a good point to leave it on. Early access does have its pros and cons. It is a slippery slope, like Wolf said, and the best way to combat any business model as a consumer is to simply do your research, give give yourself time to think about it, and try to recognize your weaknesses and your flaws, because they are being exploited, and so you need to develop some sort of anti counter to that. And my anti counter to that is like basically like forcing myself to think about a purchase before I make it. Like I have a hard rule on certain things. It's like, okay, I gotta sleep on this for like a day or two before I actually buy it. And if I really want to buy it still, then I'll do it. And if I don't, then I don't. And if I can't buy it 10 times over, then I have no business looking at this item. So that's like my stance on that. But anyway, with that being said, thank you guys for joining me on this little conversation. It was an interesting one, very different topic. This is one that we came up with on the fly. We were just doing some research and we stumbled upon it. So I'm glad we were able to make an episode out of it.
Yeah. It was very enjoyable.
For those listening, I hope you enjoyed it as well. Give the video a like if you did, a dislike if you didn't. Comment down below. Let us know what you think. What's your stance on, early game access? What's it called? Oh my god, I had a brain.
Early access games.
Early access games, yeah. Words.
Early game access, that works.
Word salad. But anyway, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think a game like Dark Souls would have benefited from it? Would we have a better Dark Souls style game or collection of games? I have no idea. I'd love to hear other people's opinions about that. So subscribe. We do podcasts every single week. We publish every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Check out the description down below for the article that we reference in case you want to read it for yourself, as well as our social medias. So we have like Facebook, Twitter, or X, Instagram, TikTok, which I think is banned now or something, right? Like it's going to get banned or something. I don't know.
It might.
It's
it might
going
not.
to like got signed to be banned.
Yeah. If it doesn't get bought by an American company, then it would technically be.
If the link is there, you could check it out. And if it is not, then disregard what I just said. We also have a Discord. There's also a link to Mr. Esoteric's Twitch stream. So he streams 2 to 3 times a week and plays all sorts of games. By the time this video comes out, he should be streaming or getting ready to stream Stellar Blade. So if you're interested in that, definitely check him out. Give him a follow. And with that being said, we'll see you in the next episode. Peace.
Till next time.